Hi, this is the story of numbers. We don't know how long ago human beings first began to speak, but at some point they did speak. They probably used words that meant numbers. Early people had the same need to talk about numbers that we have. The hunter wondered, how many animals to bring back to the tribe? How many people will fit into this cave? How many caves for the whole group to have a place to stay? How far is it to the river? When will the fruit come again? Will this fur covering fit? People who have studied language have never found a language that didn't include some idea of number. Some people only had names for 1 and 2, some for only 1, 2, and 3. One group of people in Bolivia had no numeral words, but even they talked about numbers. If there was one, they used a word that meant alone. If there was more than one, they used a word that meant many. It's very safe to say that people have always had some idea about number. We can't go back to find out, and there are no written records for very long ago, but we can assume that they used numbers for counting. The method of counting, which seems to be the same throughout history, is the finger method. Everyone knows what this means. There are other ways to count: rows of sticks, piles of stones or pebbles, heaps of grain, shells, knots on a string, notches on a stick. Here's how some people in Malaya counted: 1 stone, 2 stones, 3 stones. They used stones to record their counting. People have always counted. They've always kept tallies and records. A person might ask another person, how many deer did you see? 3. Or they might make a pile of stones with 1 stone for each deer. In these ways, numbers were used to communicate. There's another reason for numbers. Suppose someone asked another person, how many days has it been since someone killed a deer? The person could answer by making notches in a stick or a pile of stones. That way they could keep track of the number of days. Without a way to keep track, they would have no answer. Well, it was another day, which isn't very clear. It seems that people spoke many years before they put their words into writing, but that's another story. The question is, where and when did people begin to use written symbols for number words? The first time may have been about 7,000 years ago in a valley between 2 rivers. Some people called the Sumerians lived in this valley. They could read and write, and they had a way of writing numbers. They called their way of writing cuneiform. Their system of writing numbers was very popular, especially with the Babylonians, who were merchants and needed to keep records. The Sumerians and the Babylonians lived in this valley where there was plenty of clay. So they gathered it and they did this. They took the stick and they made a mark in the clay for a 1. If they wanted to show 2, they made 2 marks. And if they wanted to show 3, they made 3 marks. Then they dried the clay in the sun, and they kept the dried tablets for their records. These tablets were very hard, and many of them have been preserved. The Babylonians had some other ways of writing numbers. They made wedges in the clay in these designs to show these numbers. See how they combine them to make other numbers? 23 is 10 and 10 and 3 ones. We know about their number system because there are many of these tablets still left. Cuneiform was so popular that it was used for about 3,000 years. About the same time as the Babylonians and Sumerians, the Egyptians were living in northern Africa along another river. Sometimes they did some trading and they had to use large numbers to keep their records. Here are some of the signs they used for numbers. Here's another very old way of writing numbers. The Chinese used it, and so did the Japanese. The Greeks knew about cuneiform and Egyptian writing. They took those ideas and they made some changes. For each of their numbers, they wrote the symbol that was the first letter of the word for that number. That was true for all their numbers except one. This way of writing numbers was used by the Romans. They are still used today. Sometimes you'll see Roman numerals on clocks or on pages in books. Like the Greeks, they used the first letters of the names of the numbers. So we've talked about different ways that numbers were being written. You'll notice that if we compare a large chart of all the ways that numbers were written, you'll see something in common for the one. This idea that just a singular symbol was there. We know that people can count with a variety of objects. They may have counted with sticks. If they counted with sticks, they might have laid one stick out for one, and two sticks out for two, and three sticks out for three, in order to keep track of what they were counting. If I wanted to write this as I went, I might have one stick for one, two sticks for two, three sticks for three. It might even change as I'm trying to write faster. 1, 2, 3, in order to get my information recorded quickly. This could be the way that some of our writing started. There is still a question that remains. How did we get the numbers that we use today? Well, the first place that they're found is in India, carved into the wall of a cave more than 2,000 years ago. That was in India. How did they get to us? Finding that out was made complicated by the fact that these numbers are called Arabic numbers, but the Arabs don't use them. Their numbers may have come about like this. So this chart shows how things changed, how the numbers changed over time. Why are these called Arabic? It seems that people from India traded with the Arabs. They traded food and clothes, and they also traded books. Some Arab person bought an Indian arithmetic book. This person thought the number system was very clever, but they didn't want to change their own system. The idea was passed around, and we know that by 1,000 years ago, people in Europe knew about these numbers. We can see here how those numbers changed from the 10th century to the 11th century to the 12th century to our modern numbers. They went from Arabic to what we know today. The number was found written in a style that looks like Arabic numerals. So we know that Arabic numerals were in Europe at this time and that some people used them. Since they came to us by way of the Arabs, they have been called Arabic numerals. People in Europe knew about these numerals, but most of them still used Roman numerals. And we recognize these Roman numerals. We see them on a lot of things still today. You can see from this that if you're writing numbers, there's more of a chance of a mistake being made with these Arabic numerals. The people who needed to have numbers written down for their businesses said, no thanks to the Arabic numerals. Look at that last numeral. Do you see the date that it was written? It was about the time that the printing press was invented. If things were printed, there was less chance of a mistake being made, and there is less change in the way they are written. Well, why did they decide to make the switch once the problem of mistakes was lessened by the printing press? It's because there was no zero in Roman numerals. No zero. The Arab system had a zero, so a person could write any number. And that's the story of our numerals. They came from the Hindus who lived in India, through the Arabs, to Europe, and began to be used as we know them at the time that the printing press was invented.